And we are live. I am joined by the ever wonderful, the co-founder of Cars and Women magazine, the DUI psyop enthusiast himself, Mr. Staine Hanes. How are you doing today, man?
So far, not bad, AP. Thanks for having me on.
No, it was a pleasure. Ever since I saw your conversation with Mr. Prudentialist, I knew I had to have you on.
Well, I'm glad Prudentialist not only had me on his program, but he's a proponent of not only what I do, but he's going to be featured in issue 7 of Cars and Women magazine, which should be going to print soon. We're hoping to have it mailed out by the end of the year. But yeah, I'm glad people pick up what I put down, and being on his show has been quite lovely, actually. Through his program, I ended up on Paul Fahrenheit's show, and now I'm here. So, dude, thanks for having me on.
No, it was a pleasure, man. I had to have the founder of Cars and Women magazine on to explain to me why does Cars and Women magazine matter so much in 2022? Can you give our audience a little bit of a background explanation about why this matters?
Oh, all right, absolutely. Well, first off, there has been something of a DIY renaissance happening in the past few years. A perfect example of this is the number of people who've broken ground with self-publishing. Now, granted, those are outliers compared to the countless of people who self-publish. But let me ask you and the ladies and jerks listening to this, like, let me propose a hypothetical. Let's say you're working at like Penguin Publishing, and you got to go for your quarterly meeting with the guy who signs everyone's checks, and they're like, all right, AP, tell us how we're doing. Are we at number 1? And you're like, sorry, boss, but the guy who's at number 1, in fact, he's been number 1 Amazon global bestseller for 11 weeks. Really? He's not us? What is he? Well, sir, his name is Delicious Tacos, and the name of the book is called The Pussy. Imagine trying to explain that to the guy who signs everyone's checks at this publishing company, right? Um, so it's not just in literature, but even with something like Zines, which is emblematic of people wanting physical copies of things these days. It's not just Cars and Women, but like Man's World, for example, the Journal of One Grand Books. Like, there are so many things that seem to be blossoming in the wake of Chinese lung herpes locking the world down and like suffocating countless businesses and people's dreams simultaneously. So even though every issue of Cars and Women magazine is available at queenstrash.com in PDF format, that doesn't stop people from wanting to own a physical copy of it, you know? Hell, even the man in charge of the layout and the editor-in-chief, Anatomy of the Heads, my friend, he recently released his most recent album, Unholy Spirits Light Divine. It was done in cassette tape. And you would figure cassette tape is an outdated medium, but people want physical copies of things. So, in spite of my answer being super long-winded, it Cars and Women magazine happens to be a number of things at once. A reminder of the importance of physical media, a perfect example of a DIY psyops, but also it happens to be what I hope is a platform for not only my friends, but people to submit and have their writing put out there. It doesn't matter what it's about, regardless of what's on the cover. If it's over the fence, it's a home run. So hopefully that question suffices your inquiry, AP.
No, I think that's a pretty good suffice answer there. Um, Another thing about your magazines, which makes them unique, is that they actually have funny things in them, unlike most magazines, which are complete. Like for the people who want physical stuff, which is better than the digital, you actually have to read it with your brain, I think. But they suck because it's all just boring, the same print, mass printed garbage. You know, you're not going to find the unique autistic humor from people online and friends that you will in Cars and Women magazine.
well, I'd like to believe that if it's good enough for people to want to come see a live reading and have Art Hose and my friends read things other people wrote, then it's good enough for people to read online and pass around. It is funny, though, how just if I could just go off on a bit of a tangent here, a friend of mine who's also the resident playwright of Cars and Women magazine, he's a gentleman named Roman D'Ambrosio, all right? So he put me on to theater and live performances because when Chinese lung herpes shut down the world in 2020, one domain that suffered tremendously were music venues. And call me crazy, but I was expecting a wellspring of like basement shows, DIY venues, getting caught in a mosh pit in a building that wasn't up to fire code. But, mask mandates and the gene altering mystery fluid mandates, really, really shat the bed on that one. But the DIY spirit, where I happen to find it, was in like guerrilla theater and like, people showcasing their plays in like someone's living room, in someone's backyard. I remember expat literature had a number of readings, one of which I went to last summer. And it was held at a cafe that was closed on Sundays, and it was on a Sunday, So the bad news is shit's hard and terrible out there. But the good news is, like, people are improvising, adapting, and by the looks of it, overcoming. In fact, if it wasn't for the expat literature live reading, sitting through the first 5 minutes of the first reader, I would have never gotten indignant and went, I could do that. How come I'm not doing that? So I'd argue the magazine is sort of intertwined with a number of things, but I think most importantly, it's something that exists outside the internet, but is intertwined with it. Remember, ladies and jerks, there's a whole world outside of the internet, especially outside Twitter. Take it from me.
Yes, the world is bigger than your Twitter space with 5 people discussing what the elites are up to.
Hey,
for 5 hours.
Listen, I'm sure it's fun to hang out with the same 50 guys in the same 20 group chats, all writing about things beyond their immediate control. But come on, there's a time and place for almost everything, all right? Accept, notice, and move on. But that's just me. I could be wrong.
And I feel like what you're trying to bring back is that place for like real things in an unserious way to be brought back into the space again that, upstart magazines, unique things, physical stuff used to have in our society. Because I feel like we've become so, to use a word from Prudentialist, deracinated from the real life and like our surroundings and like our neighbors. We don't even talk to our neighbors anymore. We text them, we don't have like conversations. We don't like hang out with friends anymore, like go to social groups. And
oh yeah.
I feel like you're trying to bring that back, even if it's just in a small way. Like it is a big
thing. Well, you know what? I'm glad you bring this up. In fact, right now, as you're hearing me give you an ear beating over my phone, right now, there's a guy in my city checking the mail, and walking down the stairs is his neighbor of 14 years, and he is averting eye contact with that guy. He has never wished him a Merry Christmas, doesn't even know his first name. And if he were locked out of his apartment, he would refrain from knocking on his door or ringing his doorbell. It's weird because, deracinated is an excellent term. I remember the term atomized or atomization. I think that came from Robert Putnam, the guy who wrote Bowling Alone. But it's strange because I'm old enough to remember a time when you had to do things in real life to get things moving in the internet, and now it seems like the other way around. So just because you get used to something doesn't mean it's healthy, ladies and jerks. I mean, just look at the terminally online or crackheads or vegans, and some people don't know any better, so they can't do any better. But it is a little strange and fascinating that if I were to be jumping up and down and talking about this, no one would give a shit. But if a guy in a luchador mask and a Hawaiian shirt and sweatpants is jumping up and down, like yelling about this, some people are inclined to listen. So I don't know. I'd like to think the mask is part of it, and the rest is spite, gumption, and trying to will things into existence.
No, I think it's a good like thing to like get people in the door with the looks, you know, the humor, the luchador mask. But what you're trying to like bring back is this fundamental thing that like has been missing for most people's lives. I mean, that we most of us like don't like haven't experienced in like 20 plus years. Like, who remembers the last time like actually reading a magazine, like actually doing it?
Well, maybe the last time you were at the doctor's or the dentist's office, you were reading an outdated Highlight for Kids or Maxim from like 15 years ago. Well, we could kind of touch on this if you'd like. It's not just reading a magazine. I'm just as guilty of this too. But like, we don't. The consumption is now done through a screen instead of things that are held in your hands. So like, to be honest, dude, if it wasn't for working on the zine, I'd probably be less prone to wanting to read books and other magazines, right? But no, I mean, I'm not the only person trying to get things moving in person, but I will admit, it does help seeing other people do it, because that lights a fire under my ass. And there are enough people out there who take what I do seriously enough to be that fucking Futurama meme, shut up and take my money. Like, now I can't let these people down. So, you know, yes, like, can one pivot and make a living out of it? Sure. But ultimately, like, money was never the thing Abe the H and I wanted out of starting up the zine. Everything else was important. But when people come back to us and go, wow, this is great, how do I do this on my own? Oh, that's like planting seeds, you know? So hopefully what me and my friends do help people get up off their ass and follow through on ideas that they have. You know, you miss, okay, like, and I know this sounds super Fed posty but like, you miss 100% of the car bombs you don't plant. All right? Like, I know everyone loves that analogy of you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, but like, if you want to get through to people, you kind of have to use jarring language sometimes. So ladies and jerks, if you're sitting on an idea, if there's something you've been kicking around behind your eyes, you don't, if you're anything like me, you come up with reasons not to do it before you come up with reasons to do it. So fucking go and do it. It took me long enough to get my ass moving and get my suits dry cleaned and do my thing in front of a live audience. And I wish I had done it sooner, but no use in crying over spilt milk. So go and get it, ladies and jerks. And not just because you heard it from me on AP's show.
Yeah, it's real life. It's something real. Like, it's a you know, bringing you out from the fake reality that social media creates, like this world that like is so artificial that we used to never exist around, but now our existence is defined. And so all the things like in our real life, like we put on the back burner so we can shitpost and have a tweet thread about the super spicy topic, or what is this guy up to? I need to find out and stalk him. Meanwhile, your life, you know, your real life is pretty boring. It sucks. You don't have anything interesting going on. And you're miserable ultimately.
Oh, well, I would like to touch on something you mentioned. So this insane hyper reality that we're sort of forced to live with, I would argue, and this probably isn't the easiest thing to unpack, but I'll try. There is overlap with online and meat space now. Like, hear me out, AP. So the Australian Aboriginals have this concept called dream time, all right? I only know about this because I read about it in a Fantastic Four comic where Doctor Doom is like, you know, they capture the Fantastic Four and he blah, blah, blah. So the point is, the Australian Aboriginals have this concept called Dreamtime, and it is an immaterial plane that overlaps the physical world. And if you affect or enact a change in Dreamtime, there will be a result in the physical world. Now, we have a fourth-rate version of that called the internet now. The internet and real life are no longer inseparable. There is now permanent overlap. Now, I won't get into the discussion of, some people can't tell where it begins and where it ends, which is true. But I think simply getting things done and having your work out there is a reminder, not only to others, but most importantly, yourself. I don't know about you, but I've lost more than a few days just on Twitter going, let me log on for 5 minutes. And 6 hours later, I've gotten less than 0 done, and I'm back where I started, minus 6 hours. So it's tricky, man. I mean, I don't think, as long as I have to use the internet, I don't think I'll ever be free from its clutches. But I would like to say, in spite of living under this global algorithm-driven marketing and surveillance mind control grid, ultimately it boils down to how you use it. Some people use Twitter like a Second Life avatar. Some people use Twitter to shamelessly promote themselves. Some people use Twitter because they don't have much else going on in their real life. Or some people use Twitter as like an outlet, all right? But at the end of the day, there's always a degree of escapism in using Twitter. Like, even if I post pictures of flyers I put up, people visualize a man in a luchador mask putting up those flyers, which half the time would be correct, all right? I don't wear a mask all the time when I'm outside. But even then, when I do what I do on Twitter, there's still a bit of escapism. So I think ultimately it boils down to how you use it and what you want out of it. And there are a lot of people out there who don't know what they want out of the internet, especially Twitter. Especially people in your generation. Holy shit. Yes, now we've hit the old man Hanes power hour.
No, but I think there is a conversation to be had there because we really don't know how to use health because we've been raised on this. Like, it's all we've ever known, because real life organization and clubs and friend groups have essentially been erased and replaced with Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter group chats, which is not a great substitute for real life connection that we fundamentally need as human beings. That doesn't mean we can't be on the internet or have group chats, but you're missing a fundamental need. That's probably why people are depressed in my generation.
Oh, in fact, you know what? You kind of touched on this before we went on the air, how people raised young kids raised on the iPad, all right? The word you use was the brain is still plastic. The cement is still drying, and now the way it has a two-way interaction with the screen, that is now buried in the foundation of their brain. The neural pathways have been carved out, and the precedent for it was the screen. So there are some people who only know the screen, okay? So that being said, I think part of the issue is that the immediacy of the internet sort of overrides, in the short term, the need for interaction. But in the long term, imagine right now, there's a young woman, and the instant gratification of social media has conditioned her to think that her following is a petri dish and a sample size of society at large. And she's going to approach her late 20s or early 30s and realize, oh my God, talking on the phone for 5 minutes clears up pretty much 20 minutes of thumbs on a screen and texting. And it'll be like a revelation to her. And then she's going to realize, oh shit, people have been talking on the phone this whole time. What have I done with my life? Every day someone comes to that realization. So you make an excellent point, and where all right, Can group chats truly substitute talking to people on the phone and hanging out with them in person? No. But someone out there has been living off of cotton candy, and their body has adjusted to it. Does it make it okay? No. But, you know, again, just because you get used to something doesn't mean it's healthy.
Just because you get used to eating McDonald's does not mean it's good for you. In fact, it means that you're addicted. To use the term, you know, fast food addiction. To use a good example. And the same thing applies with social media. Social media is no different. Again, we tend to think of social media not as a drug, but in fact, because I'm in college right now, studying in the field of engineering, these apps are designed to release the most dopamine as humanly possible, and designed to get your brain to constantly crave being on the app, constantly crave being on it, want to come back to it. This is why you have like notifications, like the like button. All these things are designed to be the most like pleasing to your lizard brain as humanly possible. And there's a reason for that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know if anyone listening has ever seen footage of hitting the like button on Twitter. Slow down. But if you take that footage and play it frame by frame, the second you click either with the mouse or with your fingertip on the heart, you see what looks like a handful of swirling points of light that meet at the center, and when they all make contact with one another, it bursts into color and it turns red, and then it pops out for a second and then settles back in place. So I don't know if you're familiar with Red Letter Media or the Plinkett reviews, but there's a line Mr. Plinkett says where you might not have noticed it, but your brain did. Because like these are things tailored so that your subconscious is now feeding this thing that, whether you're aware of it or not, like you logging in every time keeps the fear of missing out at bay, whether you want to admit or acknowledge that fear of missing out is a real thing, right? But it's now this really weird tightrope act where like, oh no, anyone on the internet can see what I'm doing. So any fear you have of being seen as lame is now amplified to the millionth degree. And I would argue fear of being seen as lame is the number 3 thing holding people back of doing what they want to do.
Yeah, you make a good point there. Being seen as lame, or just a boomer, to use a phrase, somebody who isn't willing to conform to what you should be. And
yeah, I mean, I'm sure you hear or see this terminology with people your age, but like, for example, someone who contributes to Cars and Women magazine, he jokes about how him and his friend are like the youngest boomers they know. Like, in fact, his friend has, I think the term is a dumb phone. It's basically like a flip phone, and he deliberately gave up his smartphone just to have something he can text and call people with and play snakes on. And that was a deliberate decision on his part, because he figured all the internet stuff, he in his mind, he went, first of all, he has to use a computer for his job. So he felt dirty looking at bad screen all day and running home to look at good screen. Okay? So then imagine you have pocket screen that you look at when you're not focusing on bad screen. That's how he broke it down to me. And honestly, homeboy has a point. So in spite of taking measures and precautions for his own betterment, whenever anyone sees him with that flip phone, they immediately go like, oh, wow, you're still using an Obama phone? Or like, damn, like, are you so poor you can't afford a smartphone? People immediately reach for the worst thing. And if homeboy had a fear of being seen as lame, he would probably get shamed into carrying around a smartphone again. I hope that makes sense. I mean, being seen as lame can fit a multitude of things, but, you know, like, the internet is almost always included, you know?
Yeah, human beings are extremely susceptible to social pressure. Or social ostracism. We have this innate fear of being ostracized, because if you think about it, in the past, like just like 100 years ago, if you were ostracized from the community, you would die from starvation. You wouldn't know your neighbors like when winter came, you know, and they wouldn't give you food because you'd be a weirdo. Uh,
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the reasons why um, I'm not trying to say that like Scandinavian cultures like encourage people being like altruistic or whatnot, but like and altruistic isn't even like the right term, but they're basically taught to not be a dick, because if you were a dick, you would not enjoy the winter because you'd fucking freeze and starve.
yeah, you would die, or be extremely miserable on either case. But segueing into a different topic, the psyop enthusiast Mr. Hanes is also known for doing something in real life besides the magazine. He is known for putting up posters that are so effective, they cause people to claw them down like dogs. So can you kind of explain how you came up with that idea? What kind of inspired you?
You mean
Do
shit
your
posting in meat space?
yes.
All right. Well, all right. Well, first and foremost, um, it gets called all sorts of things. I've had people call it from street art to guerrilla marketing to graffiti, which is technically the correct description. Okay, but I've always seen it as DIY psyops. You know, psyops aren't just, you know, convincing tomboys to get a double mastectomy and regret it for the rest of their life. Psyops aren't just getting you to trade in your old ass car and then realizing cash for clunkers like was just like a really deceptive thing. Psyops come in all shapes and sizes, but psyops should not and will not be delegated only to those in power who piss on the weak, right? Because sometimes you got to make your own fun. So my journey into this started out with a YouTube channel. You go on YouTube and you look up 718 TV, and that's my friend Monoxus and I. We were doing the equivalent of public access television videos, but in like the 21st century. So we had zero idea about lighting, audio. None of us ever held a camera before. None of us ever edited anything before. But we had some ideas we felt were good enough to build on. They stuck to the wall, no matter how we threw it, no matter at what angle. So Monoxus was doing all this back end stuff, and I figured, you know, that would be unfair to just have him do so much heavy lifting. So you know what? Let me make a Twitter account and let me just, you know, start making a mess of things and get people to look at what we're doing. So that's the internet. But 718, that's the area code of the outer boroughs of New York City. Because when people think of New York City, they think of like the Manhattan skyline. But like Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx are just as New York as the rest of the city. Staten Island kind of doesn't count, minus the Wu-Tang Clan, and if it wasn't for the Wu-Tang Clan, no one would care about Staten Island. That being said, I started putting up flyers around my city. I always saw it as like using my city as a canvas. And I learned no matter what you put up, there are people out there who will get so mad that they will try to claw it down with their fingernails, with their keys. They'll come back with spray paint. They'll come back with like power washers, whole 9 yards. And I don't know about you, AP, but like whenever someone took a flyer down, to me, it always felt like, is someone threatening me with a good time? All right, game on. If one flyer goes down, I'll come back and put up 10. And we kind of touched on this before we went live. Some people have gotten sick and tired of tearing the same flyer down over and over and over. So they just started tearing down the 718 TV tag. And that just made me start writing 718 TV and black permanent marker on the rest of the flyer. Like, I bet you want to get petty. Let's get extra petty. Now the whole flyer is the thing they tore down. So I didn't expect people to be such a fan of it whenever I post on it on Twitter or Instagram. In fact, if it wasn't for social media, I'd be putting flyers up in like 10-hour shifts. But it's something I really look forward to doing, like every week if I can. I'm glad you dig it, dude. And I'm glad there's one flyer in particular you're fond of, if memory serves me correctly. My instincts,
yes,
my instincts tell me life shouldn't be so horrible. And I think unless you're living an incredibly pampered and sheltered life, everyone feels that way about at least one thing in their existence. Bro, imagine someone looking at that and going, fuck this has got to go down. Imagine. So yeah, it was never in the cards for me for it to be a thing I'm known for, but it is a thing I do enjoy doing. And shit, man. Like, I've had people call it street art. I've never considered it art. It all started with a fucking grudge against gentrification, actually. That's the very origin, back when it was stickers before flyers. But like I never considered myself to be a street artist until other people started calling me that. Like, who the hell would I be if someone introduces me on their program and I'm like, actually, I'm not a street artist. I'm just a goon with a axe to grind and a luchador mask. So, you know, the humble origins were just getting eyes and ears on what my friend and I were doing, and then it kind of sort of turned into this flyer to t-shirt pipeline. If that makes sense.
No, and that pipeline has produced some of the just most epic posters or flyers I've ever seen in my life. Something that you like wouldn't think about, like, because flyers have always existed, but like I've never really like paid attention to them. But like when you see them, like you instantly focus on them. Your attention is fully on them because the message and the images are just so. It draws your attention.
Well, you know, I appreciate that, man, because I know a lot of the things I work on, especially visual-wise, look like shit posts, but a lot of time and attention goes into making them. Like, all right, I'll give you an example. So one of the flyers and shirts I'm really proud of is Respect Troops. First of all, anyone familiar with Chris Dorner looking at the flyer immediately is won over. All right? Doesn't matter if they're some dude in a suit walking home from work or some punk kid who's not old enough to lie about buying cigarettes because he doesn't have a fake ID. Like, if they're a shitlord on the internet and they look at Dorner's like ever so photogenic face, they know exactly what they're looking at. All right? So take Respect Troops. All right? And the picture of Chris Dorner in between the lines respect and troops. First of all, a person's emotional and mental default is the first thing to come out, right? So their immediate response tells me like a good portion of what I need to know to make an educated guess about them. Absolute worst case scenario, you know, I have talking points and things I could bring up, but like, you know, I've seen people look at the flyer and be like, you're supporting the military-industrial complex, you fucking pig. Like, I've gotten that before. And if you visualize who says that to a guy in a luchador mask in public, you're probably spot on. Especially if you guessed Peggy Hill glasses, problematic haircut, could stand to lose a few pounds, high-waist clothing to hide the undulating blubber. If you guessed that, that's who's told me that. Or sometimes people look at it and they just want to know more. And I'm always willing to talk to someone out in the street. To my surprise, because Dave Chappelle invoked Chris Dorner by name in his special 842, I did not expect hood rats to be the cornerstone of my customer base, but that's why the Dorner shirt is the third most purchased item from Queen's Trash. So no, like I believe the flyers and the shirts are a perfect example of if what you say or do has merit or substance. Ideally, the internet is the first and last arbiter of if it's cool or not. So I would argue something like riding with the spare prohibited, keep hopes up. I'm still amazed people tear that flyer down, and I think that's my most positive, proactive message. Something like it's okay to be infected. Oh, I expect people to get angry. That's kind of why I made the flyer. But hell, I even have a flyer where you see like a sad Pepe the Frog face and the text 1990 was 67 years ago. Who the fuck would want to tear that down? I don't know, but they're out there. So find the metaphor, ladies and jerks.
Yeah, something they do is they draw people's attention, away from the screen if they're at like a bus station or just walking down the street for 5 seconds, something that rarely happens. It causes them to actually, like, if they're curious, well, hey, what does that actually mean? That looks interesting. I'm gonna go look that up. It causes like, curiosity.
And I'm glad you say it takes their attention from the screen, because there's a light post right outside my building, and that is where I do a lot of my R&D. Like, if I'm workshopping a flyer, I'll print out a proof of concept version and I'll put it up on the lamppost, and I'll do a couple of test runs. Like, I'll start at the corner and like, will it catch my eye from a distance when I'm crossing the street? If I'm just looking at some other shit and then I look up, will it appear in my peripheral? All right. If I walk down the street and I'm looking at my phone, is there some sort of like hint of something out the corner of my eye? I'll do test runs like that. And if it passes a majority of them, then I'll start test running them out in public. And again, like, not to beat a dead horse or sound like a broken record, but I know a lot of them look shit posty, but like a lot of, prepping and, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of demo runs, right? Like alpha and beta testing. A lot of that goes into flyers before they earn a slot in the folder I carry around with me that has rubber cement, wheat paste, glue, and adhesive spray. But I'm glad you noted how it pops out. And I would argue, AP, it demands your attention. Because guess what? If you look at it and you're not happy with it, you can't unlearn it. Good luck. Tear down the flyer. It's not going to unbutthurt you.
No, because it brings up uncomfortable questions if you're one of these people who defends, like, for example, tomboy genocide, which is extremely undefendable position. You get upset by that. And you're because your position is actually challenged in a way.
Yeah, dude, thank you for bringing this up, all right? Because first of all, stop tomboy genocide, I think, is something even and this is very important. Thank you for bringing this up, AP. It's easy to get away with preaching to your choir. A lot of culture war guys tend to do that, but if they had any smarts, they would be focused on trying to radicalize normies. Like, a Stop Tomboy Genocide flyer, very effective at radicalizing normies, because, like, imagine you have a daughter and you see that, and now you got to ask yourself some very difficult questions. If you have a sister, a cousin, oh no, she likes the color blue and plays with trucks. Better put her on puberty blockers before she's double-digit age. And that is the fate of many girls, not only in this country, but like across the West. All right. So to see the stark contrast of like a depiction of a young woman with short hair and a rugby jersey, and then a third-rate wannabe Anthony Fantano with double mastectomy scars, not a good look. So the way I've always seen it as, like, how can such a thing be transphobic if it is inherently misogynist? Like, remember that term internalized misogyny that used to get thrown around in the 2010s? Isn't that what, like, advocating tomboy genocide is? Ultimately, the point I want to make is, like, wow, these people hate women so much, they are disfiguring them to make them pale, third-rate imitations of men. And like you said, it is an indefensible position. Well, guess what? People act on those indefensible positions and tear down the flyers, and that only makes me want to put up more.
Or some another outcome of that is it could be another person who, instead of being offended, is like, could be a normie, could be somebody who doesn't really pay attention to things, watches basketball, type of dude plays Call of Duty. They look that up, from their iPhone, which they rarely do, and they're like, "Oh, what is that? I've never heard of this term." And they go look it up and like, "Oh." They may have vaguely defended this position just because it's the norm, but like, "Oh, I didn't realize they actually mutilate people, and this is supposed to be a good. No, I can't defend this. What's going on here? We have to
Right.
stop the madness. Cause people to actually change. Think the fundamental beliefs."
Yeah. Well. I think. Well, you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. All right. So that being said, like, how people interpret the flyers is on them. I'm not responsible for that at all. But I will say the overwhelming strength behind it is, like, if you're a proponent of it, it stays with you forever. And if you're against it, it stays with you forever because you cannot unsee it. The only way to get rid of a memory is if you stick like a Q-tip up your nose and you keep going until you taste microwave and hear the color purple. All right? Like, or unless you get blackout drunk 8 days in a row, I think that could kill enough brain cells where the immediate short-term memory is kind of fucked with. In fact, looking at something like Stop Tomboy Genocide and getting big mad over it, in some ways that lasts longer than people who support what I'm doing, because I don't know if you or the listeners are familiar with pro wrestling, but once upon a time there was a pro wrestler named Dusty Rhodes, and he once said something to the effect of, a fan will buy a ticket and cheer you on, maybe even buy a shirt, shake your hand after the event. But someone who hates you will drive across 3 counties and buy a ticket for one of the best seats in the house to boo you. So I welcome it. In fact, if it weren't for people who got big mad at ink and paper and things I say and do, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. So shout outs to people who irrationally hate things beyond their control, especially if they think that's me. Mwah. Love you, ladies and jerks.
No, it's like the people tried to ban like Pepe memes like 2015, and they just create more and more, and it gets deeper than them. It picks, it brings up uncomfortable things that makes them more angry.
Oh yeah, and dude, like, first of all, like, even 3-letter government agencies, for all of their resources and manpowers, while they lurk on image boards, they never seem to understand the most simple things like the Streisand effect or lurk 2 years before posting. In fact, the Streisand effect is very real, and, like, you would figure people would see that play out on the internet and realize it happens in real life as well, but no. There is one thing I'd like to bring up, if you don't mind, just to circle back to some of the flyers. What I have found to be very fulfilling is, like, and I think this is important to tell people about their endeavors in general. All right, set your aims and goals high. All right. But you should keep your expectations relatively grounded and low. Like, if I banked on people reaching out to me, tagging me in tweets on Twitter and on Instagram, or if they take a picture of my flyer out in the wild and tag me and put it up on the timeline. If I counted on that, I would be a very deeply unhappy and unfulfilled person, right? However, because I'm not expecting it and because I'm not looking for it, when it does happen, it is a most pleasant surprise. So, so that being said, it's things like that help punch through the membrane between online and offline, because now someone is reaching out directly to me or referencing me relative to their followers and timeline. So I never thought putting up flyers would be a two-way street that people get to gawk at from the comfort of their own home, but evidently it is. So I just would like to say that, like, again, it shouldn't just be limited to like shit posting in meat space and DIY psyops. And to circle back to what I said earlier, listen, anyone listening to this, like, if you got a good idea, like, try your best to remove the reasons not to do it out of your head. Like, there are only so many hours in the day, and you know what? Like, if Kevin Smith made Clerks at any other point in time in his life, he would be directing older material that doesn't hold weight relative to the world around him. And when you get to my age, ladies and jerks, you don't need an alarm clock anymore. Your troubles will start waking you up naturally. So there's no time like today, whether it's shit posting or painting something or writing something, seriously, like, do it to it. And don't leave it unfulfilled until it's too late, because eventually there is going to be a too late. So not to be a bummer or anything, AP. I just wanted to throw that out there to anyone listening.
No, I think many people don't take that step. They may have an interesting idea or want to do something, make a statement like you're doing, but they just never do it. But you know what they are doing? They're on Instagram or in group chats. You know, and what this fundamentally does, though, is it like it reinforces their excuse of, well, tomorrow. But first, I need to talk in the group chat because, oh, look at this meme, or, oh, did you hear what he said? Do you know what's going on with this? Do you know what's going on in Europe right now? Or something like that. Something that doesn't even affect them remotely is what they're going to put their attention to.
Ooh, you know what? I'm glad you bring this up, because one of the recent flyers I started putting up is from our friend the Prudentialist. It's his profile picture with the caption, "Do it." And I like to post pictures of that flyer with the caption, "What have you been putting off?" Because I've been fortunate to not only, you know, be friends with the Prudentialist, but every single time I've come to him with a good idea, his response, you know, if he saw eye to eye with it, which thank God has been most of the time, because he's a sharp cookie, let me tell you, his response has just been, "Do it." So I like putting that out there because, you know, it has lit a fire under my ass, not just because he's my friend, but because ideally your friends have your best interests in mind. You know, like, in fact, you could see plenty of examples on the internet when no one has anyone in their corner going, "Yo, you should fucking relax. You're kind of out of pocket." And like, the longer that debacle goes on, the less likely people are going to reel it in. People will double down until they die on a hill or have dug themselves a grave. And all the dirt they've thrown on someone was just the dirt they were standing on. So that being said, it is pretty neat to sort of, like, what started out as like an inside joke between Prudentialist and I has now turned into a flyer that I could only hope. I mean, if the replies have taught me anything, people are putting off a lot of things out there. And I did not expect those flyers to turn into like impromptu confession with my mutuals and followers. But no, I think this very weird dance that I'm still trying to figure out is taking place like somewhere in between online and meat space. I mean, you tell me, you found my crap. Like, you know, what are your thoughts on the weird simacrula of posting a picture of something I did in real life, but online, but it took place? Like, walk me through. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, man.
Well, it just seems like you were doing action with something, and you were like, it was interesting, it was funny. Which, I mean, when you just look around the world, it's very, as you like to say, you can find misery everywhere for free, but you can't find unique and interesting things. Very rare that you can find them. And the fact that you're connecting them both to link back to your real life, which would link back to your online, which is like so few people do that. It's interesting. Like there's so few people doing that it's inherently interesting for curious people. That's kind of my thought processes.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, man. And you know what? Like, okay, I'm glad you bring this up. Here's a quick little example of and I'll be honest, dude. One of the reasons it's interesting is because if I could toot my own horn a little bit here, no one is doing what I'm doing. All right. First of all, there are a lot of people out there doing graffiti, stenciling, stickers, carving shit into the glass windows of buses and train cars called scratch-eaty, which is kind of fucked up and really hard to clean up. But I've seen things on bus and train windows that deserved to be hung up on a fucking gallery. All right. So that being said, no one is putting up flyers or using their city as a canvas like I am, and no one is having things that you could sort of either take a part in or own relative to what is existing out there. All right. So I've been very fortunate and lucky that there are people who see a flyer and then find my website and they're like, I want that on a shirt. In fact, that's kind of how the website started. I used to do business in DMs like a schnook until I realized, you know what, like in the long run, this is not a good look. Like it felt like the digital equivalent of meeting someone in an alleyway and I open up like my trench coat and I'm like, yeah, I got the goods. You got the bread. And like in my trench coat. Yeah, yeah, yes. Like like I'm the fucking merchant in Resident Evil 4, So no, like, I'm glad people find it interesting enough, but I think part of what makes it interesting is because there is not very much to immediately compare or contrast it to. And I hope that's a fair statement that doesn't come off as egotistical.
No, because you're not wrong. I mean, like, to be fairly honest, when you look at people, I mean, it's mostly just like boring cat pictures and like misery posting for most people, If we're gonna be honest, I mean, yes, the cat pictures and family pictures are great, but like, it's kind of boring.
and let the record state, from what I've seen, half of Twitter wants to fuck and the other half wants to die. So posting pictures of flyers really helps stand out amidst that ocean of undignified yearnings. But you know what? All right. So here's something I want to run by you, and your listeners. And if no one gets these references, I'm sorry, but you could Google it and that will absolve me, okay? So there's a band I really like called the Melvins, all right? And I won't even get into what makes them good, but like there's at least one Melvins album out there for everyone, kind of like The Residents or David Bowie, constantly evolving their sound and the furthest thing from trotting out the hits one more time, right? So in an interview, someone asked the front man, like what advice he has to people who are like, they set out to do anything. And he said something to the effect of like, oh, be weird, like be good at what you do, no shit, practice, but be weird, stand out. And the interviewer was like, why? And he went, all right, so my first run into this was Alice Cooper in the 60s, when I was a kid. And he said, no one remembers any of Alice Cooper's peers or constituents other than Captain Kangaroo, who was like a novelty act, right? But the point is, by virtue of standing out, you know, and Alice Cooper knew all the right buttons to press to make mom and dad angry that their boy or girl is listening to Alice Cooper. But by virtue of standing out and being, you know, the exception rather than the rule, he's had an incredibly long and fruitful career and went on to influence countless musicians, including some of my favorite. So by virtue, like, so like not to come off as petty or vindictive, but like, look at culture war guys. They're all serving up many of the same tepid, lukewarm takes, but like, this version of Notice and Move On came from a guy who's terminally online and vicariously lives through other people. This version of Notice and Move On came from a Latino. So not only did he say the based thing, but he's Latino. That means it's now super mega ultra based, right? And this version of Notice and Move On came with an extra side of self-referential snark. And this culture war guy gave his version of Notice and Move On, but in a very vindictive, flying color version with alliteration, well written. He obviously keeps a thesaurus near the keyboard. But at the end of the day, they're all different versions of Notice and Move On. By virtue of anyone saying something other than Notice and Move On, they're going to stand out. Now, of course, this opens them up to criticism by virtue of, you know, fear of being seen as lame. But like, bro, fuck being seen as lame. Like, so much of that is just in your own head. And yeah, we have a deep-rooted fear of ostracization and like being shunned, but like, imagine being shunned for being correct. Get the fuck out of here. Come on. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, imagine, you know, just like taking the tomboy example, you know, imagine being shunned because you're opposing tomboy genocide, you know, like, you know,
right. Right. So imagine all these impressionable, college-educated, young, mostly white women, because lest we forget, white liberal women have the greatest outgroup preference out of any demographic in the world, right? So imagine, against their own better judgment, oh, we need to put more young women on the double mastectomy, fucking Franken Golem beer can penis crafted out of thigh and forearm meat, and then getting tattoos to cover up the scars so they could finally be their true self. I, as a woman, support this cottage industry that eats up women, you know, like, because reasons. And fear of being lame is what prevents that impressionable young woman from going, wow, this is really shitty to my sisters. This is a bad fucking idea. Oh my God. But if she says anything, oh, well, fuck Jenny. She goes against the party line, so we're not going to invite her out for a night with the girls, and we're going to stop liking her tweets, and we're going to start auditing who she follows and who she replies to. Like, you know what? Like, you have to weigh out, like, you have to weigh out what you're living to deal with and what you're willing to put up with. But, you know, there comes a point where some of it is in your hands. So come on, ladies and jerks, like, get over this fear of being seen as lame. Like, the people who have their boot on the American public's neck and erodes our civil liberties and our diminishing quality of life, they don't give a fuck about being seen as lame. Not one bit. Furthest thing from their mind. But that is all some people can only preoccupy the back and the front of their mind with. Fuck that noise.
Yeah, honestly, it holds most people back from doing anything. But something I wanted to get into before we kind of close the stream up a bit is, like, I want to talk about the daddy's money people, because, like, I can relate to this so much, that, you know, the gentrification that you spoke to, these, you know, the daddy's money people. I mean, can you kind of explain your experience, and I'll give my story about them?
Oh, all right, man. All right. So I'm glad you bring this up, because daddy's money is kind of sort of how it all started. I know I referenced having an axe to grind, and that's how all this shit popped off. But, like, all right, so story time, AP. Get comfortable, ladies and jerks. You might want to stretch your shit out, freshen up your drink. So here it goes. I live in New York City, to be exact, Queens, the birthplace of Christopher Walken, Archie Bunker, Spider-Man, Martin Scorsese, the band Anthrax, and 3 out of 4 members of SOD. All right. Also, Jon Favreau. Big ups to Jon Favreau. So that being said, oh, and Run DMC, Donald Trump, the list goes on. I mean, Nas once said that the world revolves around Queens. I'm not saying he's right, but he's certainly not wrong. So, I was born and raised here. And, you know, I know we talked about just because you get used to something doesn't mean it's healthy. Well, being born and raised in New York City has rendered me unable to sleep whenever I leave the city or state or country. When that happens, if I don't hear traffic coming out the window closest to wherever I'm sleeping, I can't sleep for the first 2 or 3 days. Because my whole life I've gotten accustomed to the sound of traffic and cars and shit outside my bedroom window. So I remember when I was a senior in high school, I was walking home, and there's a stretch of Queens, 14th Street in Astoria, where at the time it was a predominantly Central American neighborhood. So imagine my surprise when I'm walking down this long stretch of a block that spans many, many, many avenues and side streets. And there's a U-Haul, and there are these 2 honkies, well-fed, suntanned, California type looking. I couldn't tell if they were Dutch or from California at first because they had like kind of orange skin and like very bright blonde, natural blonde hair. And I swear to you, my first response was like, oh my God, are they lost? Why are they here? Don't they know who lives here? The only reason I walk through here is porque yo me hablo español. Y toda la gente que pregúntame qué te jode estoy haciendo caminando adentro de esa calle, es posible a repostar en español. But these fucking guys, they look lost. And then I started seeing, you know, a certain kind of population slowly creeping into the borough. Now, there were a lot more of them in Manhattan. Many more of them in Brooklyn, especially Brooklyn. So I started to notice not only with this population comes, you know, people, and that's a given, but then they start changing the neighborhood around them. And it's not just in places like where I live, but like take Williamsburg, take Crown Heights. Those neighborhoods throughout my childhood were synonymous with what the fuck are you doing in Williamsburg? All right. In fact, I remember going to Williamsburg once when I was a little boy, and it straight up looked like something out of a side-scrolling beat-em-up level. There were just like empty lots, Bloods on one side of the street, Crips on the other, and Hasidic Jews down Bedford Avenue. And like that was it. It was the only time in my life I've ever seen so many people standing on the corner. I'm like, are they filming like a hip-hop music video? Like, this is like a Wu-Tang video minus the stairwell and ODB, okay? So I'm not saying every person who moves here is a gentrifying, soft, well-off, wealthy piece of shit with no redeeming social value, but a lot of them are. So they start moving into a neighborhood, and then before you know it, like a little green zone opens up, like in Iraq. And in this little green zone, it specifically caters to this new population, while outside the green zone is, like, especially in a place like Crown Heights, you know, the hood, misery, agony, want, and need. Okay? So then before you know it, this population that looks a lot like the starving artist types that used to look for cheap housing, they're kind of like clownfish in a way, you know, the same way wasps look just like bees. Oh wow, look at these young people who look exactly like starving artists. I mean, sure, who cares if their rent is paid from interest accrued in an account set up before they were born? And sure, they all seem to have the same phenotypes of like trophy wife mother and good provider husband who is either emotionally absent or physically absent because he worked all the time. They all seem to look like archetypes of the same thing. So I don't know about you, AP, but you know when you're a kid and you don't know the word hypocrite yet, you've already seen examples of it, you know? Until I learned the word gentrification, I must have sounded like a crazy person talking about the people and the businesses and the rent goes up and everything is fucked. And blah, 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 blah. you know, because how do you fight an enemy you can't identify or even talk about? Because you can't fix problems you're not allowed to talk about. So this simmered in my head for a long time. And one day I was hanging out with a friend of mine, Deadline, who, by the way, perfect example of how the most interesting people in New York City are not on social media. The greatest artist living in New York City right now cannot be found on the internet, and his name is Deadline. Good fucking luck. Because he's on everyone's Rolodex, but you can't find him on Instagram or on Twitter. You can find him on LinkedIn, though, if you look hard enough. But the point is, I was hanging out with him one day, and we were talking about, you know, the neighborhood and gentrification and all these things. And in this conversation was coined the term daddy's money. All right. And that's, there's no flyer of it, but there's a shirt, and you could see the design for it on queenstrash.com. It's the Lucky Charms leprechaun, but instead of Lucky Charms on the card in his hand, it says daddy's money and the little dollar sign instead of the S. So this all started with that and a few other designs as stickers. And I started putting up stickers around the city. And it was interesting to see what stayed up and what did not. And eventually, with the help of Deadline, I learned how to screen print shirts, which, funny enough, he learned from YouTube. So it never occurred to me that I could make money off this. It's just, you know, I thought it was a good idea. I made some for my friends. And, you know, Cars and Women magazine is another example of how my friends are funnier and smarter than 93% of people out there. Even jerk-offs with like weekly columns and Substacks you have to pay for, they're smarter and funnier than that. So if my friends are like, yo, this is dope, I know it's dope, okay? So I make a daddy's money shirt. And I shit you not, AP. Like, wearing the shirt out in public, especially like in a summer on a beautiful day, much like Respect Troops, your emotional and mental default comes out. Anyone who ever looks at the Daddy's Money logo and has a look on their face like they just tasted a fart, they're guilty of benefiting from wealth, the one true privilege, okay? And just to have people get angry at a design on a shirt, I knew there was something to this. So that's the origin of Daddy's Money, and that was the origin of DIY Psyops. Eventually, you know, I just got busy with work and wrapping up grad school. So, you know, from that point forward, the clock starts ticking. And whenever I wasn't being an Excel spreadsheet task monkey, I would sit there with my chin in my hand, looking out the window, thinking about shirt ideas. And then there were other ideas that didn't fit on a shirt, but were still too good to throw away, and they ended up on flyers. And then Chinese lung herpes shut the world down in 2020 in March. And that's when I made a move. I finally have and still have the time and the energy I could devote to such things because I get to do my job from home. So, yeah, I think that pretty much about covers it. Anything you want me to elaborate on? I hope that properly answers your question as to the origin of Daddy's Money, and kind of the origin of what I do, you know, because it ultimately comes from lived experience. And I believe lived experience is the one thing we can truly speak of with 100% certainty as long as we're honest. I mean, after all, it's AP, it's your lived experience, and like, you'd know, right? So I hope that answers your question.
No, I think that was a good synopsis of your living experience, and experience with these people moving in.
These people.
That is actually, I'm going to say that because like they're kind of annoying, and they create a lot of problems. But let me get into that. So I come from this area in Central Florida, a suburb in a town, fairly nice area, and it was by a lake, and fairly nice, fairly average, you know, your standard middle class, like the early 2000s, like the picturesque, like American life, right? And what happened was that these people from New York, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, the North, started to move down here in mass. And what they would do was they wanted to change things, and like we would have like roads that were 100 years old and they were wide to account for like horse-drawn carriages, and they wanted to divide them so they could put a bike path in them. And it's just like, who's lobbying for this? Oh, it's these people with money who can lobby the city councilmen and the county commissioners. And then, like, to make room for these people, because they come in mass numbers now, we have these like 100-year-old oak groves that we had one that was close by to where I used to live, and they bulldozed these oak groves, this beautiful trees, part of the landscape, because Florida's fairly flat. So the one interesting aspect of the land, these 100-year-old oak groves, and they bulldozed them to make these ginormous McMansions with a gated community, to let you know that these people are now in a position of authority and dictate privileges on the land over you.
Oh, wow.
So I would have experience that most people wouldn't, because, like, again, I don't appreciate the mass migration of people, wealthy people back to Florida, where I'm from, because, again, it has a cost.
Oh, dude.
The land with these endless suburbs. I mean, like, if you just look up a picture of Central Florida now, like, you'll hardly see, like, any oak or, like, orange groves, which used to be there. Now it's just all suburbs that look the same. Endless suburbs.
And you know what? I'm glad you bring this up, because, like, this seems to be an issue that happens in various flavors. Like, for example, like, I've heard from mutuals, one in particular in Georgia, where, like, it is not uncommon for people to buy up what used to be, like, an old plantation home, but it's like, wow, some interior decorator from New York City who has wisely kept all their money aside ends up buying, like, a plantation home complete with the weeping willow and the winding road to get to the front entrance, so they could play pretend Gatsby with their equally well-off friends. And then before you know it, they start moving into this quiet, sleepy little town that has, like, a main street and 10 stores, and that's it. And then by the end of the decade, it does not resemble what it was for, like, over 100 years. So, and it's funny you mentioned the bike lanes, because like in Williamsburg, suddenly, like, bike lanes were, like, there overnight. And the people who live there, well, the people who didn't move there weren't voting for this. And now the first wave of gentrifiers are livid that after all the time and all the energy they spent, they are so angry. Their precious artifact children have to sit in the same classroom as the wretched spawn of the people they've been pricing out for over a decade and a half. So I don't know if it's gotten that bad to your neck of the woods in Central Florida, but when left unchecked, that's what ends up happening with gentrification.
No, I would say it is getting to that point, because, like, you're kind of priced out, like, from my historical lands that my family are from now. I mean, yeah, you can't own a home anymore. Now it's like 400,000 where I'm from, 500,000, up to $1 million now, because, again, they build these ginormous McMansions. I mean, mansions, actual mansions, where I'm from, building up these ginormous mansions, driving up the price for everything, gated communities, smoothie shops, Planet Smoothies, your herbal tea shops, everything that these, crunchy hippies and, like, they require, that must be there, is being installed.
Organic dry cleaning. I've seen it all, dude. It's so weird. And it's funny you bring that up, because, like, just real quickly, one thing that always struck me as fascinating about Florida is how, like, the further north you go, the more southern it gets. Because, like, southern Florida is sort of, like, attached to Miami, but as soon as you break southern Florida and start driving north, it's fucking straight up country. And it's heartbreaking to know that, like, these beautiful, quiet stretches of I-95 that, like, on one side, swamp, and on the other side, Merca. And now it's like on one side, swamp, and on the other side, what has cannibalized the middle class and wearing it as a skin suit. Because I'm sorry you got to hear it from me, ladies and jerks, but what AP and I are discussing are different faces of the same gem that represents the middle class going extinct. Is that safe to say, AP?
No, I would say so. Like that, they're not the middle class. They priced out the middle class. We were the middle class, and they priced us out of our own like native, towns and cities.
Right. But and a lot of these people, especially the daddy's money's type, they like in group settings or whenever people are listening to what they say, they nervously identify as the middle class because they don't want you to know that, like, oh yeah, I moved here to Crown Heights and I chop it up at the bodega with the oye como va and the fucking speakers getting a nice cafecito. But of course she doesn't want people to know that her mom's a trophy wife and her dad is a contract negotiator for DuPont and she grew up with heated bathroom tiles. She doesn't want you to know that, so she nervously identifies as middle class. But anyone with half a brainstem who has a functioning memory can point out, wait a second, how can you belong to something that don't exist no more?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. Like the middle class doesn't get their own like bike lanes that the city council will push. Like, where's this idea coming from that like have been there that all the middle class people like? No, we're gonna have you're all gonna have these bike lanes and these smoothie shops. It's all are gonna be suddenly built all of a sudden. That's not the middle class who's advocating for that. I don't think.
Oh no, I mean, like, and it's not the middle class or what's left of it that seems to be on the jump when it comes to showing up to like town hall meetings or like a zoning board regulation meeting because, like, hey, people are building things that we didn't vote on that are funded by our tax dollars. Like, unfortunately, it's not the middle class showing up. It's people with a vested interest in this, whether they look just like the cuttlefish impersonating broke and starving artists who want to start a family in fucking Brooklyn of all places, whether it's them or the waves of gentrification that you see. Because, like, I don't know if you've seen this in your neck of the woods, but, like, first of all, ladies and jerks, once upon a time it was possible to discriminate people because of their sexual orientation, okay? So, like, you would have LGBT people and broke starving artists moving into shitty neighborhoods. That was the first wave. Then the second wave are trust fund kids and the well-off who look just like the starving artists. And they tend to lean to the left with very soft sensibilities that only a college campus can incubate. Then they turn this shitty neighborhood into where it's happening, where the cool people are. And then before you know it, the businesses that come with these people attract like new money, double income, no kids types. And then it goes from the place that's happening. Before you know it, then you have people with incredible credit ratings and a very large annual income going, well, how are the schools in this district? How close are we to a grocery store? What's the public transportation like? And then before you know it, like, the finance bros are second to market because, like, oh, like, I can't, there's no room. The waiting list in Manhattan is too much. I could just get a unit in a yuppie kennel, freshly constructed in Williamsburg, and I'm less than like 30 minutes away from Manhattan. And that's phase 4. And then comes phase 5. It's where people retire early and the well-off and rich foreign nationals on permanent staycation. So I don't know what phase your neck of the woods is looking at, but there are parts of Brooklyn that are already somewhere between phase 4 and phase 5. Williamsburg is already phase 5.
I would say 4 and 5 because now that you mention that, yeah, there is a lot of rich foreigners too moving in like to these random like towns and they build mansions like from these like even from these people upper middle class whatever we're gonna call them from their new houses. But you have mansions with foreigners right next to them. That's
and pretend to be surprised if these totally not Chinese nationals are paying entirely in cash. Pretend to be surprised if and when you find out about that.
Not at all. Yeah, the daddy's money people is a criticism I do have that is different from people in my sphere. Mainly just because of the cultural damage they do to places. Like, and it is a problem. Like, they change this fundamentally. They've been this way for like hundreds of years or more. And like, you're not getting that community back once it's destroyed. You can't replace that. It's gone.
Right. Right. And you know, and I don't mean to pick on like, you know, the right wing or anything, but there seems to be an apprehension to discuss class and wealth. But first of all, be like anytime anyone mentions class or wealth is immediately labeled as some sort of like filthy, dirty commie pinko, which is sad because I don't know if you know your listeners or anyone out there has been looking at like Google trends of shit like give plasma, free food, food bank, you know, Salvation Army, but most people don't look those things up until their back is against the wall. And there are more people with their back against the wall than there ever has been. So it's not possible to fix a problem you're not allowed to talk about. So I've always wondered if this pushback from certain segments of people who lean to the right politically and culturally, I can't tell if it's because they are so disconnected from everyday life or like, you know, if they're that way because they come from a comfortable and lofty position, or if such discussion breaks the kayfabe and the escapism that is all too easy to find on a place like Twitter. I'm actually kind of startled at how this almost never gets discussed. Maybe it is getting discussed, and I'm not looking hard enough. But it is bizarre, and I can only hope something like Daddy's Money. And you know what? Come to think of it, like I really should make a fucking flyer of this. Like I'm almost embarrassed to admit that it took discussing this on a stream with you for me to realize, hey, dumbass, why don't you have a "and the circle is closed" moment and make a flyer of what used to be a fucking sticker that you put on a shirt? So shit. Thank you for ushering in this fucking revelation, AP.
Oh, you're welcome, my man.
But no, I would like to point out though that like, you know, and first and foremost, like I've never made myself out to be a political person. I find it very strange that like there seems to be, I don't want to call it like a new center, but I've found a lot of people's default position tends to be, I just really fucking hate liberals. That seems to be like the new center for a growing number of people over the past few years. And the only political things I ever explicitly discuss are like, hey, local politics are where the magic happens. All right. Like politics, especially in this country, is some crazy carny folk shit. All right. But local politics is where the magic happens. That and wealth being the one true privilege. That's all I've ever made, you know, my bones about cultural or political wise. But it's weird how that's kind of tepid and unsexy compared to like, you know, hey guys, let's get angry at this. Hey, have you seen what libs of TikTok uploaded? Or like, you know, it all just seems very reductive, and it's all a lot of stage one thinking. It always resembled to me like people leading a group that is walking laps in the desert, and like every couple of weeks they're like, oh, the horizon's just over the mountain, and then they're back where they started. Maybe I'm being hypercritical, but that's what a lot of culture war seems like to me. And I don't mean to like pigeonhole you or like force you to answer on behalf of that. That's just where I'm coming from, you know, my slovenly, uncultured, not so political ass.
I mean, it is valid criticism that you do point out. I feel like a lot of the problem here is fundamental differences in like rhetoric and the way you view things. Because the traditional right is fundamentally capitalist, like is supported by, it still is supported by capitalists. I mean, to a lesser extent now, but I mean, that is a fundamental base of what it means, like at least in the establishment, the people who set the narrative for the right, and the people who flow from that. So traditionally, that's not acceptable, because it is traditionally a left-wing position to talk about class in a way. It didn't used to be that way, but I would say since 20s, 30s, that it's become solidified in that way. You see what I'm trying to say?
No, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. But I sometimes wonder if if reluctance to discuss this stems from it not being, I mean, like, to be perfectly honest with you, like, let me give you an example. So, like, whenever you have young people who are like, yeah, we're energized, shit's fucked, man. You know, it only makes sense that something like insurrection in the streets is a million times sexier than like insurrection in the voting booth. And I know there are some problems that cannot be voted away, but like, you know, if you don't mind, I would like to make a closing remark in regards to local politics before you conclude this stream and we can have a proper send off. All right. Local politics is where the magic happens. Okay. My favorite example of this is gay weed. And that's, you know, gay marriage and legalized or decriminalized marijuana. It doesn't matter what you think or how you feel about it because it already happened. There's no point in crying over spilt milk. Now, it happened because collectivized nobodies who overcame the fear of being seen as lame and working alongside with equally lame people, like, guess what? It is a testament that common goals outweigh common interests. So these people, it started off as, you know, a ballot, an initiative, canvassing neighborhoods, phone banking, knocking on doors, going to town hall meetings where they're told to shut up by some worm who has ran unelected for over 20 years. And surprise, surprise, a lot of people in local politics end up there because they run unopposed. Most people think of elections as the 4-year pro wrestling pay-per-view presidential one. And most people can't be bothered for something like their senator or their congressman, let alone their sheriff, their mayor, the governor, whoever sits in the Chamber of Commerce. Right. So this went from the local level to the state level. All right. And once it becomes state legislature, you know, then think of all the opportunities and roads and doors that unfold and are now open for people who are proponents of that. So, you know, that's a perfect example of something that is incredibly fucking lame compared to like tap dancing on an overturned cop car, right? It is nowhere near as sexy as marching alongside 50,000 people all chanting the same slogan. And I think, you know, ultimately, I'm not saying it is the reason, but a reason it's always business as usual is because it's fear of being seen as lame or associating with people, not just you, but others might find lame, who might say lame things, who might have lame interests. Well, you know, the people who are pushing social engineering from the top down, they don't give two shits about being seen as lame. Not at all. In fact, they hope you and I and anyone listening to this sees them as lame. Because, like, if you consider a threat to be lame, you kind of gloss over the fact that it's a threat. You know? So I rest my case with local politics and shit like that. And I yield the floor to the host of this program, AP, who has allowed me to run my mouth like an unhinged lunatic calling into a public access TV show.
Oh, you're welcome. You're better than most lunatics, I would say. But
yes, can I get that in writing?
Sure, go ahead. You're better than most lunatics. So I think the point you make there is that yes, I would agree with you that local politics actually matters more. Of course it's less sexy than the Capitol and the White House and the Senate and the governorships. But again, as we've seen, you know, depending on what your view is about elections, they're gay elections now, and that's probably not going to change in the near future. So the best we can do and hope to actually affect your community and society is doing unsexy things like showing up to a county meeting. I know that's extremely it's not sexy, it's not interesting, but that actually does do something concrete.
And for what it's worth, there are people on Twitter who do an incredible job because, you know, part of the ridiculousness of Twitter is that you could find super mega hyper specific localized spheres and arenas and domains of whatever it is you're interested in. So there are guys who happen to be in the culture war camp who do incredible work on, like, hey, the county board election in like a small town in Oklahoma, or like, you know, the 14th district in Texas. Like, there are people who do that, but they tend to be the exception rather than the rule. And that pales in comparison to years of people who have been pushing for legislation to change the way how people think, right? Like, so there's a lot of catch up and work to be done, but I think it's not the biggest hurdle, but a big hurdle, and all of it is overcoming the fear of being seen as lame, you know? So I appreciate you letting me run my mouth about that.
I would just say it's just productive at this point, because, like, again, going back to the social media example about people who obsess about things that don't even affect them in their immediate vicinity, a zoning law or allowing a smoothie business to come in and, like, that will, like, have more people move in, you know, the types of people we discussed earlier. That's something you can actually affect and change in a way that you can actually see with results for your immediate area.
Oh yeah. And you know what? In fact, like, most of the job is just showing up, you know, like, so let's say there's like a zoning board meeting. All right. And, you know, they're trying to clear out the paperwork and bang the gavel to build a whole couple of blocks of yuppie kennels, or like a frozen yogurt place. Okay. Or hell, I don't know if it's like this in your neck of the wood, but like here in New York City, fucking weed, because like fucking weed was decriminalized. Okay. So now dispensaries are popping up the same way frozen yogurt spots used to pop up in the 2000s and 2010s. Right. So, you know, one reason this happens is because whenever there's like a zoning board meeting, you know, like, there aren't people showing up to oppose it. I mean, people who oppose it can voice their opinion all they want, but being physically present where the magic happens always seems to be missing in the equation. And I don't want to name names, I don't want to blow anyone's spot, but like, whenever I've written about culture war and Notice and Move On, I'll have people reply or quote tweet or DM me and say like, oh, you know, like, me and the town kept showing up every Friday to a zoning board meeting because we didn't want a stadium built in our backyard that we didn't vote for, that our tax dollars are being paid for. And like, most of the job was just showing up and picking the most articulate person with the most mental agility to be the mouthpiece. Because like, one lone kook showing up to a board meeting, yeah, that happens every week. But if there's a guy who shows up to a board meeting and, oh wow, the place got packed wall to wall, or like there were no seats left available when this guy came to speak his piece, like, you know, that it's almost like when you reach out to advertisers of something, right? Like, all it takes for an advertiser to get cold feet and withdraw from something is a handful of letters. That's it. Because they can't ignore it. And once they're confronted with something, they have to do something about it. So, in conclusion, stop thinking about the consequences of being lame, ladies and jerks. I'll quit beating this dead horse. Thank you, AP.
No, you're welcome, my man. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it was fairly interesting. Is there anything you would like to still shill to our audience before we kind of close out the stream?
Oh, sure. First and foremost, you could find me on Twitter at 718TV. You could find me on Instagram at stained_Hanes. I'm a co-founder of Cars and Women magazine, the magazine for the man of the new millennium. Issue 7 is coming out soon. We're going to be featuring the writing, thoughts, words, and psychic residue of people, including Paul Fahrenheit, the Prudentialist, Gio Penachetta, which I probably ruined his last name, so Gio, my bad. I haven't been this excited to send something to print since we started. If you're hip to public access nonsense in the 21st century, come find my ass on YouTube at 718 TV. And go to queenstrash.com. That's the launching pad for all of the DIY psyops, all of the messes I'm involved with, and that is where the shirt to pipeline, the flyer to shirt pipeline is set in motion. Oh, and find AP on Twitter and go follow him if you haven't. Or I'm gonna hire 2 Guatemalan hitmen to throw stones at the windows of your home or apartment, and then you're gonna look through the window and peer through the blinds. And you're going to see 2 small men with tattoos on their faces and scars. And one of them is going to poke the other with his elbow. And then the second one is going to hold up a oak tag. And it's not going to be a middle school science fair project. It's going to be American Populist's profile picture. Hell, if it happens tonight, it's going to be with the little Christmas hat. All right? So go follow him if you haven't. Don't threaten me with a good time. I know a lot of Guatemalans. There's a Home Depot parking lot not far from here.
I would take that threat seriously, folks. If you haven't, if you check that stuff out. They won't upset the Guatemalans. But anyway, remember, folks, the lie can't last forever. Keeps hopes up, and have an excellent